All right, my babies, we're recording. Today's script is a challenge to the ego. I find my mind saying this. I am where I am today because of what happened with this. And losing myself of today is not something I would rush for you. Okay, let's read it again. A challenge to the ego. I find my mind saying this. I am where I am today because of what happened with this. And losing myself of today is not something I would rush for you. See it? Challenge to the ego. I found my mind saying this. I am where I am today because of what happened with us. And losing myself of today is not something I would rush for you. First things first, super interesting because as of late, I have been correlating the mind with the ego. There is a subtle difference because the ego is the expression of our image of ourselves, which is kind of designed by the mind. And I found my mind saying this. Back then, I basically had identified the mind as, I don't want to say something separate, but as a whole part, maybe. I don't know. Because right now, I don't necessarily feel that the mind actually is the instigator. I have come to the conclusion that it's basically the mind is a translation of the triggers of our environment, of our surroundings, of all things that are imagined in this world that we share. That we share, me and you share this world, right? But like my reality is kind of like designed differently within the realm of my head. And my mind kind of translates that because it's an environment. My reality is its own environment, and the mind is its own, and the world is its own environment. And the mind kind of like is that in between, which allows for the communication and the translation and the expression. So a challenge to the ego, which kind of is like me calling myself out, but in a way just addressing something. I found my mind saying this, as in something within my mind came about, where I was like, you know what? This is something that stood out. And normally they stand out for a brief moment because uh, whatever doesn't really fit with the current status quo is not really at the forefront of our thought process. And so effectively, like every once in a while, you get these epiphanies, but they melt or they kind of like disintegrate or they seep is a better word, seep into the cracks of your reasoning, your logic, your communication, your reality. And they drift back into like the shadow realm, the realm where there's basically like where it's murky. But every once in a while, they kind of like jump up and go like, mofos, I'm around, I'm here, fuck yeah. So I am where I am today because of what happened with us, and it only makes sense because whether we like to admit it or not, we are the product of whatever happened, whatever we are the product. Today is the product of yesterday. Granted, there is no yesterday and there is no tomorrow, but today is a product of a certain type of consistency that has been building on itself. Sometimes very slowly, sometimes not building at all, sometimes just basically existing, right? A lot of things just kind of like stay there. But even rocks change form, and when depending on the energy levels that they're receiving, if it's basically high energy, they kind of like merge with different rocks, so it becomes a new rock or a bigger rock or whatever you want to say. I don't know why I used rocks. Normally I use trees, but those are like a lot easier to understand because a tree basically like grows on the branch that it built yesterday, and the branch is built on the trunk that was built before that, and the trunk was built on the root system. But and again, like we all start somewhere. So I am where I am today because of what happened with us, and that's basically like not really a realization. That's basically like establishing a truth that is already there. And then I say this, and losing myself of today is not something I would rush for you. So what am I reflecting on here is basically like it's like the whole I am where I am today because of what happened with us. But where I am today also means who I am today. Like, I am where I am today. So in every environment, you are going to change into something, whether intentionally or unintentionally. You're going to adapt, you're going to adjust, you're going to do everything like that, which technically means you are always in a changing state. And where your observation kicks in of who you are or where you are or how you are, all of these are basically where are related to how much responsibility you're willing to take for your own actions. Because like whatever is being consistent that led you to where you are is basically promoted by you. Let's use the word promoted. Because like if you're intentional about it, that means it's like being asserted by you. But if you're not being intentional about it, that means you're passively being taken. But either way, you being intentional or not being intentional is what you are promoting towards that environment. Fucking amazing. So losing myself of today is not something I would rush for you. And that's definitely something that came out of probably overthinking. Or in truth, it feels like it came out because I've been like I'm pushing for a future and that's basically like filled with a whole lot of statements because this has to happen. I want this to be done. When is this going to happen? Blah 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 blah. All these like smaller things that kind of like incorporate into the whole identity of who you. How would I describe that? Because in truth, there is absolutely no need slash necessity for us to consider anything except reflect. That is it. Because like every moment has its own dynamic, and the choice is always ours. Us choosing to kind of go somewhere, us choosing to kind of do something. But in truth, maybe this reflects on basically like the previous video about being present and allowing yourself the chance to leave your thoughts to exist in their environment. Because like most of the time when we're doing something, what we're doing is we're carrying other thoughts from different places and we're incorporating them. Kind of like, hey, what the fuck? So how do you seek that stability? Because your strength is literally in how you transition from one environment to another. Once one environment is basically reflected in your reality as a state of mind as well to another. Whether you're around family, you kind of have a certain state of mind, and if you go with that state of mind to a workplace, you probably would be yelling at your coworker when you shouldn't, right? And it's the same when you're kind of like rigid in the workplace and you go to family setting, like something's gonna be off because like, right, all that kind of stuff. So the idea is basically you're challenging the ego that you are not willing to lose yourself today in those thoughts. And it's not something you would rush. And the rushing part is what points to the future. Because like and I said it once, I think like 4 years ago when I first came to Lebanon after a long time. Before I came, I literally took 3 months and I was like, okay, if I'm gonna see these people after 3 years, who am I? What have I become? Who are they getting to meet? And I sat with myself and I asked these questions and I wrote them down because I genuinely wanted to kind of like figure out what part of me is actually. Oof, I was very opinionated back then. It can't be helped because I kind of like combined 3 years worth of like change into like one direct meetings with people. But I remember my cousin asking me when am I traveling, and I looked at her and I was like, "Don't speed up the process," because effectively, like when you put a date and into your future, everything in between kind of just becomes leading to that, and it takes away that moment, and that's when you lose yourself because effectively you're practicing that moment or you're practicing that timeline way before it arrives, and everything you could be doing in between kind of just is either contributing to it or not. It's sad because that's what they teach in business, even though like or self-help or whatever it is. There's no proper connection for why we choose these moments. There's no proper connection for why those are relevant to us. But what we do is we kind of like paint them and we kind of chase after them. And everything that happens in between is not really like allocated. That's why normally when you accomplish something, there's a lot of emptiness because the build towards it is kind of vague and fading or faded. Interesting video. Love you guys. Bye.